My mother-in-law tried to take custody of my daughter after I caught her poisoning her against me. The recording started at 3:17 p.m. on a Wednesday. I know because the timestamp is burned into my brain like a scar. My daughter's voice, small and uncertain, asking her grandmother why Daddy doesn't love her anymore. And Patricia's response, smooth as silk and twice as deadly. I sat in my car outside the gymnastics studio, phone pressed against my ear, and felt my entire world tilt sideways. The recording app I'd secretly installed on Sophie's backpack zipper, the one that looked like a cute cartoon bear, had just captured something I couldn't unhear. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the steering wheel to steady them. This wasn't the first strange thing I'd noticed, not even close. But it was the first time I had proof that the distance growing between me and my 8-year-old daughter wasn't natural. It was cultivated. I'd been a single father for 18 months when everything started unraveling. The divorce from Vanessa had been brutal but necessary. She'd had an affair with her personal trainer, and when I found out, she'd moved in with him within a week. Sophie split her time between us, 1 week with me, 1 week with her mother. Except Vanessa worked nights as an ER nurse, which meant on her weeks, Sophie stayed primarily at her grandmother's house, Patricia's house, the woman who'd never thought I was good enough for her daughter, who'd opposed our marriage from day one, who'd told Vanessa at our rehearsal dinner that she'd be supporting her when this inevitably falls apart. I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs I was too tired and heartbroken to follow. Sophie started flinching when I reached to hug her. Small things at first, a barely perceptible stiffening, a half-second delay before she'd return the embrace. Then she stopped initiating hugs altogether. When I'd pick her up for my week, she'd greet me with a polite smile that belonged on a stranger's face, not my daughter's. The change had been gradual enough that I'd convinced myself it was normal. Kids processing divorce, kids needing space, kids being 8 years old and developing independence. I'd read every co-parenting article, every child psychology blog, every forum post about helping children through separation. I'd done everything right according to the experts, maintained routine, never spoke badly about Vanessa, kept my home stable and loving, showed up to every school event and soccer game. And still, Sophie was slipping away from me like water through cupped hands. My best friend Kevin had noticed it first. We'd been at Sophie's school carnival about 3 months ago, and I'd won her a stuffed giraffe at the ring toss. She'd thanked me with that same polite, distant smile and immediately set it down on a bench. "That's weird," Kevin had said quietly. "Remember when she used to lose her mind over stuffed animals?" I remembered. I remembered everything about who Sophie used to be before the divorce, before the separation, before whatever was happening now. That's when I started paying closer attention, really paying attention, not just going through the motions of visitation and homework and bedtime routines. I noticed she wouldn't meet my eyes during dinner conversations. Noticed she'd developed a habit of asking if she could call her grandmother, quote, "for," even when she was at my house. Noticed the way she'd stiffen when I'd suggest we do something together, just the two of us, like we used to. One Friday evening, I'd proposed we have a movie night with her favorite snacks, something we'd done every week before the divorce. Sophie had looked almost panicked. She'd never called me Dad before, always Daddy. The shift felt deliberate, like she was putting distance between us, one syllable at a time. I'd stood in the kitchen, holding a bag of the gummy bears she'd always loved, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't normal adjustment. This was alienation. I started documenting everything. Dates, times, conversations, behaviors. I bought a journal and filled it with observations that would have broken my heart if I'd let myself feel them fully while writing. September 15th. Sophie asked if she could skip our weekend camping trip. Said Grandma Patricia told her the woods were dangerous, and I might not know how to keep her safe. September 22nd. Sophie refused to eat the pancakes I made, said they weren't as good as Grandma's and hers might make her sick. October 3rd. Found Sophie crying in her room. When I asked what was wrong, she said, "I miss Mommy and Grandma," even though she'd just spent the entire week with them. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Every statement, every rejection, every moment of distance seemed to trace back to Patricia. I started noticing phrases that didn't sound like they came from an 8-year-old. Quote 9. Sophie had said one evening, the words formal and rehearsed, When I'd asked her why, she'd looked confused, like she'd repeated something without understanding it. That's when I made the decision to buy the recording device. I'd agonized over it for weeks. It felt like a violation of Sophie's privacy, like an admission that I'd lost so much trust in my own family that I needed surveillance equipment. But I was desperate. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Elizabeth Kovacs who specialized in family law, had been frank with me during our consultation. Without evidence of parental alienation, this just looks like a child adjusting to divorce, she'd said, her voice sympathetic but firm. So I bought the device. A tiny recording bear that clipped onto Sophie's backpack, activated by a button disguised as the bear's nose. It could record up to 8 hours on a single charge. I told myself I'd only use it when Sophie was at Patricia's house, only during the times I suspected something was being said. I told myself a lot of things to justify what felt like a betrayal of my daughter's trust. The first recording had been innocuous. Patricia making lunch, discussing homework, normal grandmother things. The second recording captured Patricia telling Sophie that I'd probably forget her school play because I hadn't forgotten a single school event in Sophie's entire life. The third recording was the one I'd just listened to, sitting in my car outside gymnastics, and it had blown the case wide open. Patricia wasn't just making subtle comments anymore. She was actively constructing a narrative where I was neglectful, unloving, potentially dangerous, and Sophie, my sweet, trusting daughter, was absorbing every word. I sat there for another 10 minutes, listening to the rest of the recording. Patricia telling Sophie that I'd probably remarried soon and forget all about her. Patricia suggesting that Sophie should tell the judge she wanted to live with Mommy and Grandma full-time, because Daddy doesn't really understand little girls, does he? Patricia coaching her on what to say if anyone asked if she felt safe at my house. You can tell them you love your daddy, but sometimes you're scared. That's not lying, sweetheart. You just need to be honest about your feelings. My phone rang. Vanessa. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Quote 15. Her voice was strained, worried. Quote 16. Ice shot through my veins. I looked up at the gymnastics studio, suddenly realizing I'd been so absorbed in the recording that I hadn't actually gone inside to pick her up. Quote 17. I said, already getting out of the car. Quote 18. I found Sophie sitting on the curb behind the building, knees pulled to her chest, crying. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, and for just a second, I saw fear flash across her face. Fear of me, her own father. I knelt down a few feet away, giving her space, my heart hammering against my ribs. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and when she spoke, her voice was so small I almost couldn't hear it. Grandma Patricia said, "You might not come pick me up today." She said, "You've been forgetting things lately." I didn't want to be the last one here again. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I had never, not once, been late to pick up Sophie. Not once. "Baby, when have I ever forgotten to pick you up?" She looked confused for a moment, like she was trying to reconcile what she'd been told with what she actually remembered. Quote 22. Quote 23. The question came out harder than I intended, and Sophie's eyes widened. I forced myself to soften my voice, to breathe, to not let her see the rage building inside me. "I'm not mad at you, Sophie. I promise I'm not mad at you. But I need you to tell me what Grandma has been saying about me." She started crying harder, and I wanted to reach out and hold her, but I didn't. I couldn't. Not when she looked at me like I might hurt her. She said you might try to take me away. She said you might not let me see Mommy anymore. She said some daddies get angry and do bad things when they're upset about divorce. My vision blurred with fury so intense I thought I might be sick. I managed to keep my voice steady. "Sophie, I would never, ever take you away from your mom. And I have never, not once, done anything to hurt you. Do you remember me ever hurting you?" She shook her head slowly, and I could see the confusion on her face, the war between what she'd been told and what she knew. Quote 27. Quote 28. The words came out flat, definitive. Sophie's eyes went wide. "She's been telling you things about me that aren't true. Has she been doing this a lot? Saying things about me when Mommy isn't around?" Sophie nodded, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't understand. Why would Grandma lie?" "Because she's trying to take you away from me," I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I said, "Sometimes grown-ups do things they think are right, but they're actually very wrong. I need you to trust me, okay? Whatever Grandma has told you about me, it's not true. I love you more than anything in this world, and I'm going to fix this. I drove Sophie home in silence, my mind racing through options and consequences and next steps. When we got to my house, I called Elizabeth Kovach immediately. She answered on the second ring. "We need to file for an emergency hearing," I said without preamble. "I have evidence, recordings. She's been systematically alienating Sophie from me for months." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "How did you get recordings?" "Device on Sophie's backpack. I can send you the files right now." "That might not be admissible depending on your state's recording laws. Let me check the statutes. In the meantime, send me everything you have, and I mean everything. Dates, times, specific statements, behavioral changes you've documented. We need to build an airtight case because if Patricia's doing what you say she's doing, she's not going to go down quietly." She was right. Patricia wouldn't go quietly. Patricia would fight with everything she had, and she had a lot. She had money. Her late husband had been a successful real estate developer, leaving her with a house in the best school district and enough in the bank to hire the most expensive lawyers in the county. She had social standing. She was on the board of 3 charities, a regular at the country club, the kind of woman who knew judges and city council members by their first names. And she had Vanessa, who despite our divorce and her affair, had always been close to her mother. Too close, I'd thought sometimes during our marriage, unable to make a single decision without consulting Patricia first. I spent the rest of the evening uploading recordings, compiling my journal entries, gathering school records and attendance sheets that proved I'd never missed an event, pulling bank statements that showed regular purchases of Sophie's favorite things, photographing her room in my house with all her belongings exactly as she liked them. By midnight, I had a file folder 2 inches thick that documented 18 months of active, involved, loving parenting, alongside 3 months of increasingly disturbing evidence that Patricia was trying to erase me from my daughter's life. Elizabeth called me at 7 the next morning. She escalated faster than even Elizabeth predicted. I got a call from Sophie's school at 11 that morning. The principal, Dr. Yolanda Reeves, sounded uncomfortable. "Mr. Thornton, I need you to come to the school immediately. There's been an incident." My stomach dropped. "Is Sophie okay? Is she hurt?" "She's physically fine, but there's been a report made to Child Protective Services, and they're here now wanting to speak with you." I made the drive to Sophie's school in record time, my mind spinning through every possible scenario. When I arrived, I was directed to Dr. Reeves's office, where a woman in a state-issued ID badge was waiting. She introduced herself as Amanda Foster, CPS investigator. "Mr. Thornton, we received a report this morning alleging that your daughter Sophie exhibited signs of emotional distress and made concerning statements about feeling unsafe in your home. The report came from Patricia Montgomery, Sophie's grandmother. We're required to investigate all reports, so I need to ask you some questions." My hands clenched into fists in my lap, but I kept my voice level. "Patricia Montgomery is the subject of an emergency custody motion I filed yesterday. She's been systematically alienating my daughter from me for months, and I have extensive evidence of this. Whatever she told you is part of a coordinated campaign to remove me from Sophie's life." Amanda Foster's expression didn't change, but she made a note on her clipboard. "I understand this is a difficult situation. However, I still need to conduct my investigation. Has Sophie ever expressed feeling unsafe in your home?" "Not until her grandmother started telling her she should feel unsafe. I have recordings of Patricia coaching Sophie on what to say to authorities." That got her attention. Amanda looked up sharply. "You have recordings of the grandmother?" "Multiple recordings. They're currently with my attorney as evidence in the custody case. Patricia has been telling Sophie that I'm dangerous, that I don't love her, that I forget about her, none of which is true. My attorney can provide you with copies of everything." Amanda made more notes, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. "CPS investigators dealt with a lot of false reports, a lot of custody warfare, but they also couldn't ignore legitimate concerns," she finally said. Quote 48. "I agreed to everything because what choice did I have?" Amanda interviewed Sophie in the school counselor's office while I waited in the hallway, my leg bouncing anxiously. 30 minutes later, she emerged, looking thoughtful. "Sophie is clearly confused about her feelings," Amanda said carefully. "She initially said she was scared at your house, but when I asked her to give me specific examples of why, she couldn't. The statements felt rehearsed. I've seen this before in high-conflict custody cases. Relief and rage warred in my chest. So you believe me? I believe that something isn't right, and I'm going to investigate thoroughly. But Mr. Thornton, you should know that Patricia Montgomery called our office this morning and said she has concerns about your mental stability. She claims you've been erratic, potentially paranoid, and she's worried you might be experiencing a breakdown following your divorce. Of course she did. Of course Patricia was already building a counter-narrative where I was the unstable one, where my accusations against her were the delusions of a man who couldn't handle his marriage ending. It was brilliant and terrifying, I said, quietly. Amanda scheduled the home visit for the following morning, and I drove home in a daze. When I called Elizabeth to update her, she didn't sound surprised. This is Patricia trying to control the narrative. She knows we filed for emergency custody modification, so she's trying to make it look like you're the problem. We need to accelerate our timeline. The hearing is scheduled for next week, but we're going to push for it to happen sooner. In the meantime, document the CPS visit meticulously. Make sure your home is perfect. And whatever you do, don't contact Patricia directly. Any communication needs to go through me or the court. That night, Sophie asked me a question that broke what was left of my heart. We were sitting at dinner and she'd been picking at her food, barely eating. Finally, she looked up at me with those big brown eyes that used to light up whenever I came home from work. Quote, 56-6. I set down my fork carefully. Quote, 57. Quote, 58. The manipulation was so calculated, so precise, that I wanted to scream. Patricia had inoculated herself against my accusations by preemptively labeling me as mentally unwell. If I denied it, I looked defensive. If I confirmed there was conflict, I validated her narrative. She didn't. How could she? She was 8 years old, caught between adults she loved, being told contradictory things by people she trusted. Amanda Foster arrived at my house at 9 the next morning with another CPS worker, a younger man named James Liu, who took photographs while Amanda conducted the interview. They inspected Sophie's room, checked the refrigerator and pantry, examined the locks on doors and windows, asked about my work schedule and childcare arrangements. Sophie was at school, which Amanda had deliberately planned. She wanted to see my home environment without Sophie present, wanted to talk to me without worrying about a child overhearing. Quote 60. Amanda said, settling into my living room couch with her clipboard. I walked her through everything. Morning routine, breakfast preferences, school drop-off, after-school activities, homework time, dinner, bedtime rituals. I showed her Sophie's carefully organized bedroom with the bookshelf I'd built, the art supplies I kept stocked, the photos of us at every milestone. I showed her the calendar on my fridge where I tracked every school event, every soccer game, every doctor's appointment. I showed her the folder I kept with all of Sophie's school papers, medical records, and achievement certificates. Amanda observed, and I couldn't tell if that was good or bad in her assessment. I have to be. I'm a single parent, and Sophie deserves consistency and structure. Amanda made notes, asked more questions about my relationship with Vanessa, about the divorce, about how Sophie had adjusted. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. I chose my words carefully. Amanda finished her notes and stood. Quote 67. It wasn't a complete exoneration, but it wasn't a condemnation either. After Amanda left, I called my mother in Phoenix and told her everything. Mom had never liked Patricia either. She'd called her that controlling woman throughout my entire marriage, and she listened to the whole story with mounting fury. I'm getting on a plane tomorrow, she announced. You need witnesses to the kind of father you are, and I'm not letting that woman steal my granddaughter. Mom arrived the next afternoon with 2 suitcases and a determination that would have been funny under different circumstances. She immediately started documenting everything, taking photos of Sophie's room, recording our dinner conversations, writing down every interaction. When Sophie came for her weekend with me, my mother greeted her with fierce love and asked her directly, quote, 71, quote Sophie, caught off guard by my mother's directness, nodded slowly. She says Daddy might not be the best at taking care of me. She says Daddy gets confused sometimes. My mother's expression went ice cold. Quote 73. It was the validation Sophie needed from another adult, someone who had no agenda except loving both of us. Over that weekend, I watched my daughter slowly begin to relax around me again, begin to question the narrative that had been built in her mind. But I also watched her struggle with the cognitive dissonance, the confusion of being told opposite things by people she loved. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. Elizabeth had filed motions for temporary custody modification and a full psychological evaluation of Patricia's influence on Sophie. Patricia, through her attorney, a man named Gregory Stone, who had a reputation for being ruthless in custody battles, had counter-filed for grandparents' rights and emergency temporary custody, claiming I was having a psychological break and posed a potential danger to Sophie. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept replaying every moment of the last 18 months, wondering what I'd missed, when I could have stopped this before it spiraled so far. At 3 in the morning, I got up and checked my email, finding a message from Elizabeth with the subject line, "Read immediately." She'd attached a document that made my blood run cold. It was a petition from Patricia seeking full legal custody of Sophie, complete with affidavits from 3 of her country club friends who swore they'd witnessed me being verbally aggressive towards Sophie at public events. Every single affidavit was a lie. I had never, not once, been verbally aggressive toward my daughter, but Patricia had recruited witnesses, had built a case, had constructed an entire false reality where I was the problem. The hearing started at 9. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, less dramatic. Judge Howard Brennan presided, a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for not tolerating games in his courtroom. Patricia sat on the opposite side with Gregory Stone, looking dignified and worried in a way that would play well to anyone who didn't know what she'd been doing. Vanessa sat beside her mother, and when our eyes met, I saw conflict in her expression. She didn't want to be there. She didn't want to choose between her mother and her daughter's father, but Patricia had made that choice for her. Elizabeth opened with a statement that was precise and devastating. She outlined the pattern of alienation, presented the recordings with timestamps and transcripts, showed the documented behavior changes in Sophie. She called me to the stand first. Under Elizabeth's questions, I walked through everything: the gradual distance with Sophie, the discovery of Patricia's manipulation, the documentation I'd kept. When Gregory Stone cross-examined me, he tried to paint me as paranoid, obsessive, potentially unstable. Stone tried several more approaches, but Elizabeth objected to most of them, and Judge Brennan seemed increasingly impatient with the character attacks. Then Elizabeth called her surprise witness, Dr. Margaret Sutherland, a clinical psychologist who specialized in parental alienation. Dr. Sutherland had reviewed all of the evidence I'd provided, the recordings, the journal entries, the behavior documentation. She'd also interviewed Sophie twice over the past week with court permission. Her testimony was clinical, factual, and utterly damning. Quote 80. Dr. Sutherland said, her voice steady and professional. Quote 81. Quote 82. Elizabeth asked. Quote 83. Gregory Stone tried to discredit Dr. Sutherland on cross-examination, suggesting she was biased because I'd hired her. She shut that down immediately. I was hired by the court, not by Mr. Thornton. My obligation is to Sophie's well-being, not to either party's desired outcome, and based on my professional assessment, Sophie's well-being is being significantly harmed by her grandmother's behavior. Then it was Patricia's turn to testify. She took the stand, looking poised and sympathetic, a concerned grandmother who only wanted what was best for her granddaughter. Under Stone's questioning, she painted herself as a protective figure who'd noticed concerning signs in Sophie's behavior and had simply talked to the child about her feelings. I never told Sophie to be afraid of her father, Patricia said, her voice trembling slightly. I simply listened when she expressed her own concerns and validated her feelings. And these concerns Sophie expressed, what were they? Stone asked. She said she felt confused about spending time at David's house. She said sometimes she didn't want to go. I told her it was okay to have complicated feelings about the divorce and that Grandma would always be there for her. It was a masterful performance, calculated to present every manipulative action as concern for Sophie's emotional well-being. But then Elizabeth stood for cross-examination, and the mask started to crack. Quote 89, quote 90, quote 91. Patricia's composure slipped. That was taken out of context. What context would make telling a child that her father doesn't care about her acceptable? I didn't mean it that way. How did you mean it then? Because it seems quite clear on the recording. Patricia's attorney objected, but Judge Brennan overruled him. Patricia struggled to answer, and Elizabeth moved on. Quote 96, quote 97, quote 98. quote, $999, quote, $100. Patricia's face flushed. That's not relevant. I think it's very relevant. You opposed his marriage to your daughter. You've made comments over the years about his parenting abilities. And now, conveniently during a contentious divorce, you've suddenly decided he's unfit. Isn't it true that you've been working to eliminate Mr. Thornton from Sophie's life so you can raise her yourself? Objection, Stone called. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Brennan said, but he was watching Patricia with an expression that suggested he'd already drawn his own conclusions. Elizabeth called several more witnesses. Sophie's teacher, who testified that I'd never missed a parent conference. Sophie's soccer coach, who said I was the most involved parent on the team. My mother, who provided context about Patricia's long-standing disapproval of me. By the time we broke for lunch, the momentum had shifted entirely. When we reconvened, Judge Brennan looked at both parties with an expression that made my stomach drop. This was it. The moment that would determine whether I kept my daughter or lost her to a grandmother who'd been systematically trying to erase me. I've reviewed all the evidence presented today, Judge Brennan began, his voice firm and measured. I've listened to the testimony, examined the recordings, and read Dr. Sutherland's psychological assessment. What I see here is deeply troubling. Patricia straightened in her seat, looking hopeful. The evidence of parental alienation is overwhelming, the judge continued. Ms. Montgomery has engaged in a calculated campaign to damage the relationship between Sophie Thornton and her father. The recordings are clear and damning. The psychological impact on Sophie is evident. This is not grandmotherly concern, this is manipulation. Patricia's face went white. Quote 110, Judge Brennan said firmly. Quote 111. The courtroom exploded in whispered reactions. Patricia stood up, her composure finally shattering completely. Quote 112. Quote 113, Judge Brennan said coldly. Quote 114. He turned to me. Quote 115. Vanessa stood up, tears streaming down her face. Quote 116. Judge Brennan nodded, and Vanessa looked at her mother with an expression I'd never seen before. Betrayal, rage, and grief all mixed together. I didn't know, Vanessa said, her voice shaking. I didn't know the extent of what Mom was doing. I knew she was spending a lot of time with Sophie. I knew she had concerns about David, but I didn't know she was actively trying to turn our daughter against her father. That's unforgivable. Patricia tried to reach for her daughter, but Vanessa stepped away. Don't touch me. You used my divorce, you used my work schedule, you used my daughter to fulfill some kind of need to control everything. I'm done. The aftermath happened in a blur. Patricia left the courtroom surrounded by her attorney and country club friends, her reputation in tatters, the recording of her coaching. Sophie had already leaked somehow. I suspected Elizabeth had quietly made sure the right people heard it. And by the next day, Patricia had resigned from 2 of her charity boards. Her social standing, the thing she'd valued almost as much as control itself, was crumbling. I got full documentation of the judge's order, copies for myself, for Sophie's school, for anyone who might need to enforce the no-contact provision. Elizabeth warned me that Patricia might try to find ways around it, might attempt to send gifts or letters through third parties, but for now, she was legally cut off from Sophie, and that gave me the space I needed to start repairing what she'd broken. The first family therapy session was scheduled for the following week. Dr. Rachel Okonkwo specialized in parental alienation cases and came highly recommended by Dr. Sutherland. Her office was warm and comfortable, designed to put children at ease. Sophie was nervous when we arrived, holding my hand but not looking at me. Dr. Okonkwo started gently, asking Sophie about school and soccer and her favorite books. Then, slowly, she began asking about her relationships with me and Patricia. Sophie, do you remember some of the things Grandma Patricia told you about your dad? Dr. Okonkwo asked. Sophie nodded, her voice small. She said Daddy might forget about me. She said Daddy didn't know how to take care of me right. And do you think those things are true? Sophie looked at me then, really looked at me, and I could see her trying to reconcile what she'd been told with what she actually knew. Dr. Okonkwo said softly. Quote, 25. Quote, 126. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. I love Grandma. I know you do, sweetheart. And it's okay to love Grandma even though she did something very wrong. People we love can sometimes hurt us without meaning to, or sometimes they make bad choices because they're hurting inside. It was the beginning of a long process. Over the next several weeks, we had twice-weekly therapy sessions. Doctor. Okonkwo worked with Sophie to help her separate the false narratives from reality, to understand that the confusion and fear she'd felt weren't based on anything I'd actually done. She also worked with me on rebuilding trust, on being patient with Sophie's process, on understanding that the damage Patricia had done wouldn't heal overnight. Slowly, incrementally, I started getting my daughter back. The first time Sophie initiated a hug, I almost cried. We were making dinner together, something we hadn't done in months, and she'd accidentally knocked over a measuring cup. She'd frozen, like she was waiting for me to get angry, and when I just laughed and helped her clean it up, she'd thrown her arms around me. Quote, 129. She'd whispered into my shirt, "I missed you so much." Vanessa started bringing Sophie to my house for handoff instead of meeting in public places. During one of these exchanges, she pulled me aside. "I need to apologize," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "I should have seen what my mother was doing. I should have protected Sophie from her. I was so wrapped up in my own anger about the divorce and my work schedule that I just let Mom take over, and I didn't question the things she was telling me about you. You didn't know," I said, though part of me was still angry at her for being so blind. "But you know now, and you're choosing Sophie. That's what matters. I've cut off contact with my mother," Vanessa continued. "I told her she won't see Sophie or me until she gets serious help. She's been calling constantly, sending emails, showing up at my work. I filed a restraining order yesterday." I felt a mix of vindication and sadness. Patricia had lost everything: her relationship with her daughter, her access to her granddaughter, her social standing. But she'd brought it all on herself through her need to control, to manipulate, to destroy what she couldn't have. 3 months after the hearing, we had our final evaluation with Dr. Okonkwo. Sophie had made remarkable progress. She talked openly about the things Patricia had told her and how she knew now they weren't true. She talked about feeling angry at her grandmother for lying, about missing her but understanding why she couldn't see her right now. She talked about feeling safe with me again. "Sophie has shown exceptional resilience, Doctor," Okonkwo told me privately after the session. The therapeutic intervention came just in time. Another few months of Patricia's influence and the damage might have been permanent. As it is, Sophie understands what happened and why, and she's rebuilding her sense of trust in you. I'm recommending to the court that Patricia remain under supervised visitation only if and when contact is resumed, and only after she completes her own therapy and demonstrates real understanding of the harm she caused. The final court date came 4 months after the initial hearing. Judge Brennan reviewed Dr. Okonkwo's report, the therapy notes, and statements from Sophie's teacher about the positive changes in her behavior. He made his ruling without hesitation. The therapeutic progress has been significant, and it's clear that Sophie's well-being has improved dramatically with Patricia Montgomery out of the picture. I'm making the no-contact order permanent unless and until Ms. Montgomery can demonstrate to this court's satisfaction that she has addressed her behavior through intensive therapy and poses no risk of further alienation. Any request to modify this order must include documentation from a licensed therapist specializing in alienation behaviors, and even then, any contact would begin with supervised visits only. Patricia wasn't present for the ruling. According to Vanessa, she'd moved to Florida to live with her sister, unable to face the social consequences of what she'd done. The country club whispers, the knowing looks, the charity boards that had quietly asked her to step down, all of it had become too much. She'd sent Sophie a letter through her attorney, which the court reviewed before deciding it could be given to Sophie. In it, Patricia had written a non-apology, full of justifications and blame-shifting, talking about how much she loved Sophie and how she'd only been trying to protect her. Dr. Okonkwo read it first and decided Sophie shouldn't see it. "This letter isn't an apology," she told me. "It's more manipulation. Patricia hasn't learned anything. Until she can take real responsibility for her actions, she's still a danger to Sophie's psychological health." 6 months later, life had settled into a new normal. Sophie was thriving. Her grades had improved, she'd made new friends, she laughed more freely than I'd heard in almost 2 years. She still had therapy once a month as a check-in, but Dr. Okonkwo said she was doing remarkably well. The court had modified custody again, this time giving me equal physical custody with Vanessa. We'd developed a co-parenting relationship that was actually functional, built on our shared priority of protecting Sophie from future harm. One Saturday morning, Sophie and I were making pancakes. Her request, something she'd avoided for months during Patricia's campaign, and she looked up at me with those big brown eyes. Quote, 142. Quote, 143. Quote, 144. I flipped a pancake, buying time to figure out how to answer. Quote, 145. She smiled, the kind of real, genuine smile I'd been afraid I'd never see again. I know, Daddy. I'm not scared anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. How's my favorite granddaughter? I smiled and typed back, She's good, Mom. We're both good. And for the first time in 2 years, I actually believed it. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.